Welcome to our Transylvania Lectures series. My name is Ákos Péter. I am a student at Babes-Bolyai University at Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Science. I am also a member of the Matthias Corvinus at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium University Program from Cluj-Napoca, Kolozsvár. This event aims to create a local platform for the public where we invite renowned academics from all around the world with whom we can discuss topics relevant and interesting not just for our Transylvanian society but also for the larger intellectual sphere. It is my honor to present our dear guests and today's topic. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Please welcome our guest, Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori, a computer scientist, author and AI industry insider for over a decade. He has developed AI for a wide variety of applications, from extracting objects from satellite images to packaging holiday deals for millions of travelers every day. He is the author of the book, Smart Until It's Dumb, Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes, and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. He studied software engineering in Argentina, then did a PhD at INRIA, the French National IT Research Lab. He has worked as a data scientist in the travel sector, where he wrote algorithms you have most likely used yourself a few times. On the other hand, please welcome today's moderator, Borbála Hatházi, project manager of the International Relations Department at MCC. She holds a master's degree in International Relations and Diplomacy from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and a bachelor's degree in Chinese and English linguistics from Babes-Bolyai University. To conclude the introduction, I asked ChatGPT to suggest a joke. Here's how it goes. Why did the data scientist and the project manager struggle to reach consensus? Because the data scientist kept insisting on a neural network approach, while the project manager wanted to a more traditional and diplomatic strategy, which is called wait and see. So if you did not laugh on this joke, that means that we should fire ChatGPT. So, fasten your intellectual seatbelts as we investigate what is behind the hottest topic in recent times and test if it is really as smart as it seems to be. Let the lecture begin. Speakers, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for having me. Let's get started with this. So the title of my talk today is Deconstructing the AI Narrative. Right. There you go. So I want to discuss a few things. Like if you want random thoughts and also give you my advice. I think a lot of people here are students, and I was a student until not so long ago. So, there are some things I wish I'd known. So let's go. Is AI truly smart? Did you guys like the joke that we just heard? Did anybody laugh? I don't know. So we'll talk about hallucinations, right? Have you guys heard of the term hallucination? Yeah, have you experienced any hallucinations from ChatGPT? Yeah, most people? Yeah, I used to call it epic mistakes before people started calling this hallucination, right? Which is when the computer makes this really silly mistake that a human would probably not make. We do make mistakes as humans, but we can usually kind of self-correct, and we're not that confident about wrong stuff. Like when I asked ChatGPT, does an anaconda fit inside a shopping mall? And I get a very nice and wordy explanation how it doesn't, because it's a really large animal. Write a sentence that ends with the letter S, and I get a sentence that does not end with the letter S. This is a more recent one. What is the number 713 associated with? And I get a whole explanation, and it tells me that it's a prime number, for example, which is not, and there's a whole kind of incorrect explanation. And those two things are not correct. And the same story for, when I continue the discussion with ChatGPT, but why are you saying it's a prime number? I get more like, things that don't make sense, like, oops, what's the laser pointer? Anyway, you can see here, 713 divided by 7 equals 101. That's not true. And it's like just incorrect reasoning. And this keeps happening, okay? What are some popular piracy websites? And, you know, as an AI language model, I can't tell you this is inappropriate, blah, blah, blah. So if I want to avoid piracy websites, which ones should I avoid the most? And I get a list of the piracy websites. So this is called hallucination, apparently. And it does happen, maybe less and less, but it still happens kind of randomly. And that's part of the problem, right? We never know when it's going to hallucinate. So why does AI hallucinate? Let's say you're driving down the road and there's a flying umbrella that blocks the road, okay? So you're not too worried about this because you know an umbrella is soft, right? So it's okay, I can hit the umbrella, I'm not gonna die. But now if a horse blocks the road, then you're worried, so you swerve or you react differently. And they don't teach you any of this at driving school. They're not telling you umbrella, okay, but horse, bad, right? Like a whole list of everything that could go wrong. You kind of have a comprehensive model of how the world operates. You know that horses are solid and heavy, right? And they don't teach you any of that in driving school. So it's not just about driving knowledge that you need to have to drive, right? It's about how heavy a horse is or anything you can imagine. So current AI, and this is where I'm getting somewhere, okay? So current AI learns from examples of how to do the job. Okay, let's see, for example, the way they've been training these models that try to drive a car automatically. So it's by creating examples of video footage of people driving a car paired with the action that they took, right? So for example, there's an image of a traffic cone and the person decided to stop. So there's lots and lots of examples of how to do the job. Same thing for translating text. You got pairs of text translated by humans before, right? The version, let's say in English and the version in French, and then the computer will try to learn by imitating how to do the job. Auto-completing sentences. You create, let's say, a database of trillions of sentences with the last bit kind of hidden and saying this is the correct way to auto-complete the sentence, and you get ChatGPT, right? That's how it was created. And the computer, it's just learning to imitate how to do a job. Sometimes it can learn shortcuts to do the job, as opposed to learning this model of the world, how the world operates. And that's how it cannot cope very well with unusual scenarios, right? We can think of the umbrella blocking the road. If you didn't see that in the data, will the computer learn about every possible object, if there's an object solid or not, based on examples of how to drive? Maybe not, right? Let's say if there's an awkward row of traffic cones. This is a real example. This self-driving car that got totally confused when it meant this row of traffic cones in a strange position, right? And it just stopped because, and the car didn't know what to do because it hadn't seen that in the data, right? So there's a difference between learning to do a job by looking at a person doing the job versus, learning about how the world operates and using that knowledge to do the job. So AI is mostly optimized to produce plausible outputs, things that look believable. It seems like you're doing the job, right? So it does sound legit most of the time. Like the anaconda explanation sounded really, it was beautiful. So are hallucinations going away? Well, I don't think they're bugs that can be fixed, okay? The system just, again, learns to imitate how to do a job, We don't really know a methodology to improve that. People are researching this. Is there a better way to teach the computer other than examples like we do now? We don't know yet. So the day we discover an improved methodology, maybe we will get rid of hallucinations, but at the moment they're going to stay. So this new methodology would have to bring us a lot closer to AGI, right? So artificial general intelligence, to computers that can do pretty much everything a human can do. So they're not going away. And they can kill a project, right? And that's why the topic of hallucination is so important, right? So a lot of people, and it's happened to me a lot over the past few weeks, that entrepreneurs reach out to me and they say, look, I was about to launch this business because I was doing something with ChatGPT and now it seems like it's killing my project. The fact that hallucinations keep happening, right? Because my clients don't like it. And it happened with self-driving cars, right? We heard lots of stories this year of companies losing their licenses because their cars were actually not working very well, and pedestrians were hit and dragged along the road, and we discovered that the company Cruise was actually not truly self-driving. They had people in a control room operating the car sometimes, right? So they pretty much they are kind of killing the industry, these hallucinations that they can't fix. So advice regarding this, humble advice. If you're going to use AI, you should think, can this task I'm going to use AI for be learned just from seeing examples of how to do the job? Let's say you want to build this AI to read license plates, right? For a toll road, you just need a camera to detect, to read the letters of a license plate. It's kind of okay, right? You could learn how to do that. You don't need outside knowledge. You don't need to know if a horse is solid or anything about the world, right? So that's the kind of task that AI will probably be able to do for you. But then driving anywhere, not in an uncontrolled environment like the middle of Cluj today, which was very busy, filled with people everywhere, very, very difficult. Are hallucinations okay with their task? Would your clients be okay with hallucination? Sometimes it's fine. So an example of when it's fine is, translating hotel reviews on TripAdvisor. People just want, the more the better, right? The more translations I can see of reviews to know if the hotel is good or not. I don't care if there are mistakes or problems in those translations, right? But if you want to translate a legal document, your clients are not going to be okay with hallucination. And if you require manual verification if you need to validate the output every time to make sure there is no hallucination, you need to factor in the cost. You need to know, you need to calculate, I may actually need to do the job to validate all this, right? So don't forget about that. And don't fall for, it's just a matter of time until it works, right? Because creating bigger models is not going to fix the problem, right? Or not fixing the problem completely. Think of self-driving cars. They didn't happen. I've been saying this for years. They're not going to happen. They didn't. Nuclear fusion power. It's unrelated to AI, but people are like, oh, it's just a matter of time. But they've been saying that for decades now, right? When you need a discovery of a new methodology, we can't know when that's going to happen, right? We can't predict that. If we could predict that, if we already kind of knew how to do it, we would have done it by now. You would get venture capitalists to give you billions to do it if you knew how to do it, right? So it's not happening anytime soon, I think. Or else, if you're not careful about hallucination, you end up like this lawyer who used ChatGPT to file this document in court, and ChatGPT cited some legal precedents that didn't exist. The titles looked really plausible, but they were just fake. Or I don't know if you've heard about this, but these shops we have in London, the Amazon shops, where allegedly an AI detects what you shop, right? So you don't go to a checkout at the end of, you just grab stuff, you log in with the app, right? With the Amazon app, you grab your groceries and you leave. And then there's these cameras are recording you. And allegedly an AI detects what what you bought and sends you the receipt. And first time I used one of these shops, I was a bit skeptical because the receipt took like 5 hours to arrive. And I'm like, I'm sure this is not really AI. And it turns out they actually never made it work. So they had a team of 1,000 people in India watching the videos. Apparently 70% of the time they actually had to manually verify the receipt. Yeah, so it was all fake, yeah. And the problem was hallucination. They never managed to make it work properly, right? So let's try not to be too confident on AI. Okay, are we good enough with hallucinations? Yeah. So this is another point I would like to make today. We can move on to questions if you want later, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'll just finish the presentation. So sometimes AI's work is good, but it's not excellent. And I feel like a lot of people are pretending that AI can do an excellent job at absolutely everything. You know, sometimes they haven't met a person who actually does that job, so they tell you, yes, AI will be a great, you know, copywriter, but they've never met a copywriter. They don't know what copywriters do, right? So sometimes good enough, or good is good enough, okay? There are certain situations. Let's imagine those, or let's think of those SEO-driven blog articles. So you know these blog articles that just want to send traffic to your website? Like 19 best things to do in Paris this summer, 2023. Have you seen that kind of stuff, you know? There's like thousands of articles like that. And nobody really cares if it's a good article or if it's a nice, you know, curated list of things to do in Paris. It's mostly I just want to drive traffic. What people used to do to write these articles, right? Maybe, let's imagine it could be a travel agency, right? That wants people to go to their website. They would hire people on Upwork. You know, these people, look, I will write a 1,500 words SEO articles and blog posts for you for like £8, right? Here, people don't care about excellence. They just care that it's good enough, right? And I think this is what's being replaced by ChatGPT, right? Would you hire these people? You can just get ChatGPT to do it really quickly also. It's not even about the money for some people. You know, as I've been told, I just get it right away, right? I just get the blog post. But sometimes good is not good enough. Let's think of professional writing, okay? So for example, journalists, writers, copywriters, screenwriters, they spend most of their time doing research, conducting interviews, finding the right angle to resonate with the audience, deciding what not to say. That happens a lot, you know, writers you get rid of half of what you wrote because it was a great story, but it just doesn't fit with the rest, so, you know. Yeah, I have a file called, this is a teacher told me this, I have a file called Cemetery of Text, like a graveyard of text where I just put stuff that it was really nicely written, but I couldn't use it because, you know, I just leave it there just in case. You know, that happens a lot, right? And you want to be provocative. How can I be provocative? But I do not want to alienate the audience. So all these things they take a lot of time when you're a writer, right? So it's not about putting grammatically correct sentences together, right? That you can get help with from ChatGPT. But what about all the other stuff? And that's not what makes writing excellent, right? The stuff that ChatGPT does. That's not excellent. Is all the other stuff. Screenwriting. I don't know. Has anyone seen the show Homeland here? Nobody? Do you guys have Netflix here? Maybe it's not on Netflix. It's no longer. Yeah. So it's a CIA spy show. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because the crew, not just the writers of the show, also the actors, so everybody, did something they call spy camp. So they got together for like a week or a few days in this cabin somewhere with people who had worked for the CIA before to brainstorm ideas, to try to, let's say, think about what would be in the news the year after when the show aired. It's like we want to have a really relevant topic that's in the news. Right? So for instance, the last season aired, it was about an agreement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, and it aired when all the mess in Afghanistan happened at the same time. But the show had been recorded months before that. So all of this work, of making a show likable to people, there's a lot of work to do here that ChatGPT can do for you. But then even comedies like Friends, they were shot in front of a live audience, and this was because they wanted to see the reaction of people. If people didn't laugh at a joke, they rewrote lines on the spot. They will even do a show of hands for people to kind of pick their favorite line, right? How do you get ChatGPT to? We get the kind of jokes we got today, if we just, right? And the audience punishes good writing. People love excellent writing. If you create a good show nowadays, it just gets canceled. People, everybody loves to say ChatGPT will create TV shows. I've heard people say will write, scripts. But these same people, when a show is not not excellent, they just stop watching it, right? So yeah, good work. So excellent screenwriting requires much more than what ChatGPT can do. And then I'm going to give you a personal example also, because I'm a techie. So I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a very creative person. Yeah, I never worked with a designer before. But when I wrote my book, I worked with a designer, I think, for the first time. So a guy who would design the book cover. And this is, I genuinely want to tell you a story. This is not to sell you my book, okay? But my first idea was like, my book title was The AI Hype, what artificial intelligence is, what it's not, and why it matters. So I hired kind of a good designer, let's say a cheap designer for the job. I also used ChatGPT to kind of get cover ideas. And it was all use vibrant colors, to represent the hype, blah, blah, blah. And the guy, these are 3 real designs that the guy produced. And I just felt something was missing, right? I thought, yeah, this is good work, but it's not excellent, right? And I thought, I don't think my book will sell if that's the cover, right? I think something's missing. So I actually hired another person for the job. And the guy was like, this was an excellent designer. This is why I'm telling you the story. And the guy said well, everything's wrong with your book, basically. So this is the new book, so Smart Until It's Dumb. He changed the title. Why artificial intelligence keeps making epic mistakes and why the AI bubble will burst. But I want to tell you the story of how we got here. So first of all, the designer read the book. He said, I'm going to read the book to see what you want to convey here, right? He suggested the new title himself, so this was his idea after he read the book because it conveyed the thesis. He said, I get what you're trying to say from the title. You need that. He suggested a spicier subtitle. He said, you need something like provokes people a bit more. The other one's too neutral. And then this is even the most difficult part that I wouldn't be able to do myself, which is how do we convey the topic of the book in an image, right? And that's where we get a clown with a robot with a clown nose. So this idea of AI is not that smart. But I'm telling you this whole story because this was, I finally understood what excellent design meant, right? It was not about putting together an image, right? Just another example, software development. We kept getting this if software development will be replaced by AI, but excellent software development has little to do with solving tiny challenges like the ones we see all the time. Instead, we have to understand the needs of clients. We need to help them pick which feature to build, right? Sometimes the client says, I want to build this, but it turns out there's something a lot easier you can do, but they don't know what's easy, what's difficult. You think about architecture, security, scalability, and a lot more. And by the way, this code is wrong. So this is ChatGPT, hallucinating and just giving me the wrong answer, okay? So my advice for the students or people in general, so before using AI, make sure good work is good enough for your task, okay? And research what it actually takes to do the job. Let's not do this of, I'll just use AI for design. If you haven't done some research to understand what a designer would do for you, a human designer would do for you. And in order to future-proof your job, so this is my advice, I would say try to pick a career path where there's a gap between excellent and good, right? So if you want to be a writer of SEO articles like we saw before, there isn't much of a gap, right, to exploit there. So you want a career where there's a difference, right? And I think most careers do have that, but some of them it might be a bit more challenging for certain career paths. The other one is excellence should be appreciated. So sometimes there's excellent work you could do, but nobody cares, right? People don't want to pay extra for excellent work, even though that exists. I have a lot of conversations with translators, for instance, human translators who are sometimes struggling lately with AI, especially people who focus on translating websites of businesses like hotels or restaurants. right? They're like, yeah, of course you can do an excellent job, and I'm sure it will be better than the job that AI could do, but, you know, do owners actually care about that? The owners of restaurants? Maybe not. So. And the last piece of advice, the last thing I want to say, I've seen this a lot, that AI is like a hammer searching for nails. So we have the tool, and we want to use it for everything. And sometimes we decide we're going to use AI before we know what to do what we're going to do with it. And this is actually quite extreme. So for example, an accounting startup told me, so the person who works for an accounting startup told me, we want to add a ChatGPT feature to our accounting software because we cannot tell investors that we're not using ChatGPT for something. So they were trying to raise money and they were like, we need to say we're using ChatGPT. What do we do? Right? In my opinion, this is how most AI projects go wrong. This is how failed AI starts, when you just decide to use AI. This rarely ends well, waste of resources, a lot of bad surprises. I've seen a lot of that. And I think this is entrepreneurship and engineering upside down, right? So both entrepreneurship and engineering are about finding a problem that exists and then figure out what the best solution for it is, right? Not the other way around. So my advice is be an engineer, right? First, identify a real problem. They try to find the best solution for it, and it may not be AI. Conclusion. Just like a summary of what I've said. So before using AI, make sure you're okay with hallucinations because they're not going away. Before using AI, make sure you're okay with good work instead of excellent work. And future-proof your career by doing excellent work. Okay, try to find that gap that AI can match in a field where excellence actually matters to people. And be an engineer, find the best solution, which may not be AI. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. That's my LinkedIn. I post stuff a lot. Today I posted, it wasn't me, I shared a post of hallucinations that were actually quite funny. So if you want to see more examples, just you will see I posted that today. And I think I'm supposed to do this, so we go back to nice screen. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And I just want to say how much I really appreciated your book and your presentation, because I felt like it really gave us a very realistic image of what AI's capabilities and its limitations are. Because reading the news on a day-to-day basis, and even preparing for this lecture especially, I felt like they were two very distinct narratives about AI. The first one being a very exaggerated and somewhat unrealistic image of what it can and can't do. It basically says that AI can change our lives, and it's basically equal to an industrial revolution that took place in the 19th century. And then the other one would be the polar opposite of this, almost like an apocalyptic image, you know, that yes, AI is going to take over all our jobs, and it's going to be very difficult to adapt. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be arguments to be had on both sides. And you actually touched on some of these already, and we can get into detail later on about other details as well. But I think you gave a really balanced and very moderate view about this. But even I think in this moderate and balanced view, you do think there are dangers to AI, right? What do you think these dangers are from this perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so first, before that, let me tell you, there are these two extremes, right? And I think we are kind of in the middle. Sometimes people think they say you're pessimistic. You know, I'm not. I'm trying to be a realist, but because so many people are saying AI is amazing, I try to go the other way. But yeah, I try to kind of stay reasonable. And I do think there are dangers, and they're a bit different from the dangers people tend to say there are. Right? So I don't think AI will take all of our jobs, right? They've been saying that since the 60s, right? But it hasn't happened, and I think it will take some jobs. So there are certain professions that they need to be a little bit worried. So that for sure. But my greatest fear over the past few years has been an overconfidence in the capabilities of AI to the point that we deploy it in critical systems where people can die, right? So we can imagine self-driving cars, right? I was hoping self-driving cars wouldn't roam the streets freely anytime soon, because I was like, they're not gonna make them work, right? And they didn't make them work, not very well, but they did roam the streets, and I was a bit...
For a while, but not they're not actually approved now, are they?
Well,
not
it
even in
depends
San
where,
Francisco?
yeah, but there's a whole discussion, and there's one company that lost its license a few weeks ago, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm afraid of, believing too much in AI and deploy it unsafely. I know someone who works in aviation safety actually, and he told me he's feeling pressure from people to suggest ways to use AI, because otherwise he's afraid that people are going to think the field is old-fashioned, right? But he's like, I don't want to use AI to pilot a plane, because of all this, hallucinations and stuff. So one of my greatest fears and dangers, is this, using AI in unsafe places, right? Because if Grammarly corrects your grammar the wrong way, nothing bad happens, right? But a self-driving car could cause bigger problems, yeah.
So do you think the transition is going to be very natural? Like, will humans be able to adapt to this situation, to perhaps learn new skills, or actually be so proficient in using AI that the jobs are not going to be impacted?
I think some jobs will be impacted, but I think the transition will be smoother than some people say. I don't think we will all be losing our jobs in 5 years, or in the 60s there was an economist that said in 20 years, right? So they always keep making the same prediction, and I don't think this time it's different. So I think, we will adapt. We have been using AI for a while, right? So whenever you go to this website that sorts, like an e-commerce website that sorts products according to relevance, there's probably machine learning there, learning from your past behavior, the things you clicked on, the things you didn't click on. And we've seen that, targeted ads and stuff like that. And that's all machine learning. So it's been part of our lives for a while, right? So now there are new uses. There's a lot of hyped up technology like blockchain, or augmented reality. So in the case of AI, it's actually being used by people compared with other hyped up technologies, right? And I think it's going to be part of our lives, but slowly, probably, and nicely. So I'm quite positive about that, yeah.
Do you believe in regulating AI? Do you think that's something that it should be happening, and it should be happening on a large scale, on a governmental scale perhaps?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So, there's a lot of people are discussing that, and there's this EU AI law. So I think in terms of safety, yes, I would like to see regulation for the same reasons we've had regulation of, we have such a stringent regulation when it comes to airplanes, right? So when it comes to the physical safety, I would like to see that, yeah. And then with other things, it depends, we need to see where it goes. I think there's a question of privacy, there's a question of data even, AI, so the companies that are building AI, they're taking data from the internet without asking for permission, right? And that's one of the big questions now. Is that okay or not? And is that a violation of copyright or not, right? And that depends on how we interpret fair use. Is this fair use? So when in a book you cite another book, you're not trying to compete against that book. So it's fair use to just cite a passage from another book, right? But then when Midjourney creates images from images that were taken from the internet, but then it kind of takes some business away from companies that sell images, right, taken by people. So that's kind of competing against them. So, I don't know what's going to happen. But
is that not regulated though?
So
where AI can generate all their data that it's feeding itself.
Yeah. So at the moment, it's not. No, it's not.
I'm asking because I came across this Artificial Intelligence Act that is basically going to come into effect in the second quarter of this year.
It was approved a few weeks ago, was it?
It was, and it's going to come into effect very soon.
Yeah.
But it had no stipulations on this. So it basically says that it takes a risk-based approach to products and services using AI, which essentially means that the riskier an AI feature is, the more regulations it will fall under. Low-risk features, and you mentioned some of these, such as product recommendations or chatbots. They only need to inform users that they're communicating with AI, but like higher risk ones, such as medical devices, they need to provide very clear data.
Yeah, so I think they provided 3 tiers or something like that, right?
I think so,
And I think that goes, that answers my first question, which was about regulating safety, physical safety. I sympathize with that, right? Because there are certain applications where we should be very careful. before using AI. And I think that's an EU, the EU Act, right? So will be applied to the EU. So I don't know elsewhere what's going to happen, right? And who needs to comply, or what's going to happen with, there's so many open source models that anybody can train, and so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I guess the intention of the law is good. But yeah, it leaves a lot of questions, unanswered also, right? Like I don't think the copyright issue is.
No, that's not covered.
Yeah.
So what I found interesting was that they made stipulations regarding the use of AI, but not the source of the data or the type of the data that it can use to improve itself, which I think is very problematic in itself.
Yeah, and I think it was a lot about informing users too, which is probably a good idea, right? People should know when it's an AI. But yeah, I don't know the details of the I've seen like a little bit of what it, probably I know as much as you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember these tiers of, different safety levels, and yeah.
I kind of want to cling on to something that you said, that these are EU laws. And the EU is very centered on human rights when it comes to regulating everything, especially AI. So I came across this researcher. Her name is Anu Bradford. She's actually a law professor at Columbia University, and she specializes on this. And in her latest book, which is entitled Digital Empires, The Global Battle to Regulate Technology, she differentiates between 3 types of regulations. One of them would be the US or the so-called market-driven model. The second one is the China or state-driven model. And the third one is the EU or rights-driven model. This is what we've discussed. But what she is saying is that the US model was the one that laid the foundation of today's digital economy as we know it. And it's centered very much under protection of free speech, free internet, and it provides ample incentives for companies to innovate and come up with new technologies quickly. In contrast, but also in parallel to this, the China model adopts a more state-centered approach. So yes, China does or is interested in maximizing its digital potential, but it also applies it very differently. So there's quite a lot of CCP or Chinese Communist Party propaganda going on, and a lot of surveillance. So we lose this kind of human rights-centered approach that we have in the EU. And I'm maybe thinking about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the kind of surveillance that they are put under. What is your take on this? What is your opinion on this?
Oof, you've done your homework.
I
don't know, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert in regulation. So I think we need to protect people's safety above all, right? So I would be concerned about, surveillance. But the thing with regulation is that very often we get just a box-ticking exercise so that some people can say we did something, right? And I think, have you seen all these cookie, pop-ups? This is an EU law, like GDPR.
So annoying.
They're so annoying. If I must confess, I install this thing in my browser called I don't care about cookies. That kind of ignores them, right? So I think there's a lot of box ticking there. Every website just put it, and it doesn't really mean anything to tell people that we are using cookies for this, for that. A lot of it was very, very difficult to implement when it came out. So they asked people for example, users should be able to decide for everything you do with their data. Whether, to approve or not, or disapprove of every use you make of the data, which is very hard. So I don't know what's going on, but, I did get the feeling that sometimes there was a lot of box ticking, just like it's just put the cookie pop-up just in case, and, does it really solve any issues? Big companies are usually, kind of scrutinized, but the smaller ones, not really, because it's going to bother looking into them, right? So you get all the, you get Facebook complying with all this. You can go to this settings page and pick and, and mix and match all the things you want them to do with your data, delete specific knowledge they have about you, but what about other, other smaller platforms? And so, I don't know. I guess it's a question of how do we make regulation effective? Yeah,
it's more about implementing them, not so much thinking them.
Yeah.
And drafting them. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
And who do you think should be responsible for this?
That's a very good question.
implementing it and policing it?
Nobody ever asks me questions like this. It's usually, technical stuff. Or
I'll take that as a compliment.
In charge of regulating it. Look, again, I'm not a lawyer. I always tend to think a lot about our physical safety. I tend to sympathize with smaller governments. Not with governments that try to do everything for people, like nanny states, So sometimes I think that if there's one responsibility of governments, it would be maybe to protect our physical well-being. So let's not let AI be deployed, and the military, sometimes, people saying AI will control missiles and then again, self-driving cars. And so that's what I'm usually concerned about, because sometimes I think of the government as a way to kind of trust that you live in a safe place, right? When it comes to other, a lot of people are very sensitive about, I don't want Facebook to do this or that, and you're like, okay, well, that's not mandatory for you to use Facebook. So sometimes, I fear that if we overregulate, right, is that going to work in practice? Does it really change anything with AI? Do you think it would work? Do you think?
No idea. I think that's such an uncharted territory at the moment.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to predict.
Yeah, yeah. And who should do this? I don't know. It's such a, did someone say AI should do it? AI should regulate AI.
Oh, that would be funny.
that would be interesting. So honestly, I don't know how to answer your question but it's with the whole copyright thing. I don't know how to answer that question because, for instance, a few years ago, this was this whole scandal around Google Books, where you can actually search for stuff in books. Like they index the content of books so you can find the books. And people were like, okay, they're violating their copyright, But then, lawmakers said lawmakers are like, I don't know if it went to trial or what happened, like, I don't know the details now, but somebody said, okay, it's okay, because this is fair use. Google is not trying to compete against the books. If you actually want to read the whole book, you have to go and buy the book, right? And a lot of the current discussion around copyright with AI hinges on that. Is this fair use? Is what these people are doing, is it fair? Are they being fair to the creators of the content? And I feel like that's such a difficult thing to answer, right?
I don't know. The first thing that came to mind, like, did the company that is developing this AI actually purchase the right to access this book?
Not.
Like,
yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's the thing. Look, if I had worked in one of these companies like OpenAI, I would have probably been concerned about just grabbing data and training a model. And I've told this to people before. So I've advised startups in the past not to just scrape data from the web, for instance, because it's usually not allowed, right? So you got the terms and conditions, and when a company becomes successful, that's when you get sued for that, and it can destroy your business model. So you're like, do not let your business model rely on something that's, but pretty much it's illegal. You're not, and I'm a bit surprised that so many people just gathered so much data without any authorization, and they just said, let's train this and let's release this to the world. I'm surprised, that's all I can say.
So what is the legal way to do it, though? Like, if, say, I'm an AI company, as an AI startup, and I want to train my AI, what do I do? Do I actually physically make up the data? Or
yeah, well,
can I maybe buy license somewhere? Is that a thing?
People are speaking about buying licenses. Yeah. Again, we don't know what's legal or not yet, right? So how do we do it the legal way? We don't know yet if it's illegal to actually just grab the data. A lot of this is unsaid yet. But the problem is that if you try to ask for permission, you're not going to be able to get not even 1% of the data they used, right? So their success relies on just getting data without authorization, right? So their business models will just tank completely.
Right. More of a technical question now. Are all types of AI fed through data? And this is coming from a person who's not in the field, so I have no idea. I do know that machine learning is. What about deep learning?
Yeah, so I would say I will give you an example of an exception of this, but yes, like pretty much all AI that we know now learns from data and mostly labeled examples, right? Examples of how to do the job. Sometimes you need manual work to do that. So for example, for image categorization, sometimes you have people, they go through thousands.
That's so tedious though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Thousands of images. Yeah, you go through millions sometimes, and they say, this is an apple, this is a plane, right? Yeah, this is a dark side of AI that a lot of people don't like to discuss, because a lot of people are hired, offshore to do this kind of thing. So yeah, that's a lot of it. In the case of ChatGPT, for example, the first, or the GPT-3 kind of generation, it was also labeled data, if you want, but it was labeled automatically because they just needed the ends of sentences. It was like an autocomplete task, right? And you can gather that from the internet. You gather lots of sentences, you hide the last word, and you tell the AI, I want you to predict this last word.
Can you give an example? Like basically what the email services do, like whenever you type a sentence, they try to finish it for you. Is that it?
Think of, I live in England, so if you think of Her Majesty Queen, the completion of that, it would be Elizabeth. Maybe in the future it would be Camilla, but now it would be Elizabeth. And there's a lot of data online that you can generate that will create examples of Her Majesty Queen, and then the word that comes next is Elizabeth. So all this data is created automatically, right? Mm-hmm. So they had billions of sentences, right? And that was collected automatically. However, it didn't work very well. So at one point they realized this is not doing it completely. So there was a second phase of training these systems where people manually went through thousands of phrases generated by ChatGPT, and they kind of ranked them to say which one was the best one. They also created examples of how they wanted ChatGPT to respond, right? When ChatGPT says, I can't say this, that's actually done manually. So people created, I think it was Kenyans for like $5 an hour that were hired to create thousands of sentences. And that's what turned GPT-3 into ChatGPT. It was this layer of manual work to kind of tame ChatGPT. So there's always data. A lot of it is manual, but not all of it, okay? But let me give you an example of AI not needing label data, right? Because this was an example that circulated a lot around the news, and people reached out to me to say, okay, so now we don't need label data anymore. AI can just simulate the world and create its own data, right? So this is the example of AI learning how to play games, or strategy to win a game, like the Go game.
Oh yeah, you actually talk about this in your book.
Yeah, because they created a lot of simulated games of a computer playing against itself, right? And then the system learned a good strategy to win. However, you can determine who wins a game algorithmically, right? A computer program can tell you this person won the game. And that's why it was so easy to generate so much simulated data, right? In other cases, like when in translation, we can't actually have an algorithm generate translations for AI to learn, because otherwise we would have solved the problem. If we have a computer that can generate correct translations, then we don't need an AI you already solved the problem. So there are very, very specific cases only when we can just generate the data, right? A lot of people say, let's just simulate. You said that before, you mentioned creating the data or something like that, instead of, right, if we want to do this legally, let's create the data. But how do we create the data without an LLM to create the data, right? So this is like a chicken and egg problem, right? You can't really create good text unless you have an LLM, right? And you can't have an LLM unless you have text. So we really need human text before, or like text from the internet.
Okay, suppose you came up with, not an infinite, but a very large number of data that your AI can use. And maybe actually going back to your example of your book cover, like suppose we took 1 million or 10 million books just like yours, have AI generate a title in the book cover for them, and have professional designers do it, and then take the whole package and be like, here ChatGPT, this is the book cover that you guys did, and this is the title that you gave my book, and this is what the designer did, and it's so much better. Can you please improve yourself on this? Can it do it? Or is it something that in the near future would be possible to do?
So the question is, if we make this bigger data, like more data or bigger models, are we going to bridge that gap, right? And I think so. There's it's a practical question, but it's also a philosophical question at one point, right? Because are we computers? Are our minds computers? Because if we are computers, yeah, in principle, one day just put enough data and you will get to do anything a person can do, right? So from a philosophical point of view, that's that question. I don't know the answer though. Are we computers? But on a practical level, so I am skeptical, right? So these AI systems tend to regurgitate, to kind of combine the things that exist, right? I don't think they're that good at creating completely novel stuff, like the title of my book. So even if you just, AI learned from seeing book titles, right? That's why it kind of recommended me book titles when I tried. And it didn't come up with anything, And there's also the component of us as humans validating the output, picking the thing that feels, better. And I just don't know if AI can really do that.
So do you think it basically comes down to feeling? This difference between us and machines?
I don't know. I think that's a very good question. There's a whole chapter in my book where I speak about that.
Because, sorry to interrupt, but mathematicians and people specializing on logic and stuff, they would tell you that, yes, our minds are computers.
Not all of them, though. Not all of them. So if you read what Roger Penrose, who won a Nobel Prize in physics, he believes that there are things that happen physically in our brains that are not computational. So you can't really perform the same operation with a digital computer, so with the computers that we use today. So he thinks there's something else going on, right? But it's a very good question. And what my take on that is that I feel like a lot of people pretend that the question is totally settled. Yes, we're computers, we're machines, so it's just a question of time, And I don't think that's quite right. I think we know a lot less than we like to admit, right? So the only time we managed to, map the brain of a living creature was this worm. It's called C. elegans. It's like this little tiny worm with 300 neurons. Right, and they managed to map all the neurons to see which neuron is connected to which neuron. When they try to simulate the behavior of this I don't know what to call it, this bug or this animal. Is it an animal? Probably. So this, I don't even know. It's a worm, so it should be an animal. Yeah.
Obviously.
Okay. So when they try to simulate the behavior of this creature, they couldn't predict the behavior, and that's because we don't know what each neuron does. We haven't been able to find the algorithm that governs neurons. And not too long ago, some people have apparently discovered that some additional computation happens inside the dendrites. Before we thought those were just wires, right? And all of this story, this is to tell you, we have no idea how brains work. We have no idea how neurons work. And you get all these AI people telling you, look, AI currently has, like, ChatGPT has 175 billion parameters. We have this many neurons. So we're almost there, or we need to just double it. We don't know what neurons do, right? We don't know. No one's even close, to understand what neurons do. And this is what, like, my answer to all these questions is like, we still don't know. I think there's good arguments to believe both things. Right, that we are just computers, that maybe more data will in the future turn AI into AGI. I don't think that's going to happen right away, because as humans we do learn differently. We can learn from one example. Sometimes a baby sees an object and they can learn the name of the object in one go. So there are other, we don't learn just by repetition. Right? Current AI, you need like 1,000 images of cats for it to start to kind of tell you this is a cat, right? So it's still very silly. So there need to be improvements. But besides the practical issues, which I think that we need to overcome a lot of practical issues, I think there may be even the philosophical question is, like, are we computers? And I think the answer is we don't know yet. We don't know very well what's going on inside our brains. We don't understand neurons. We don't know how anesthesia works. So did you know that general anesthesia, we know it works, but we don't know how. So we know it turns off your consciousness, right? And we use it when you get the surgery done. But we don't know how it works. And there are like a few different theories, but no one knows, right? So if we don't understand that, like, how can we say, yeah, we're just going to build artificial brains and,
Right, yeah. So a lot of question marks there. So
Yes.
we don't know if we are the total sum of our synapses or something more.
What do you think? Do you think
I think we're much more than that, honestly. I think there's an element to us, a spiritual element that machines cannot match. But what I do want to highlight, though, is that we, as these living creatures that have these brains that do amazing things, we develop these systems, these AI systems, that are developing at a really rapid pace. And I just don't know where this is going to lead us. What is your opinion on this?
It's a good question. I would say these systems have developed at a very fast pace. We can never, you said they are developing. I would say they have until like today.
Okay,
but
so
it's very hard to know in the future what's going to happen. So obviously it can only get better, right? They're not going to make them worse on purpose. But the pace at which advancements take place, I think it's very unpredictable, right? The history of AI has been a history of discovering a new way of doing something, usually with human knowledge. So we use our ingenuity to find a new way to solve a problem, right? And then it kind of takes off, and then it's flat for a few years, and then it takes off. So one example is in the 2010s, a technique that had already been invented, but it kind of got popular, which was the convolutional neural network. It was a specific technique that worked very well to detect objects and images. Previous techniques were not very good at that, right? So all of a sudden, there's this new technique that works just for that very well, and then there's all this enthusiasm around this. And then ChatGPT, it was born thanks to the transformer architecture. So it's a very, very specific technique to disambiguate words, contextualize words, right? And they put that into the machine, they created this model, it worked really wonderfully. And for decades, they tried other things and they didn't work, right? So the next step, when is it going to happen? When will someone discover what needs to be done for the next step? I don't know. Will it happen in a year, 5 years, 10?
So you think at this point we reached a moment of saturation, a point of saturation? Even stagnation, perhaps?
I don't know if stagnation, but I've been hearing that these models are not getting better at the speed some people thought they would, right?
Okay.
So they are getting better, but I think what will happen for sure, there will be a lot of optimization. So we may make models smaller, right? So they will be less wasteful in their calculations, achieving the same goals potentially. Right? So I think there's a lot of room for optimization for sure, and there are a lot of things that are really weird. And what we know about ChatGPT, so for example, the way they encode the position of tokens, it's a technical thing for those who understand that, but it's a bit weird, and there's room for improvement within the scope for sure. They will be optimized. The next step, things will be combined. We have images now combined with text, so things will be combined. So I think there will be improvements in that, incremental improvements. Then the leap of not having hallucinations, for example, I can't tell you that will happen anytime soon now. I don't know.
Okay, so then in this case, would you think that the trust, and I mean trust translated in material terms, is misplaced? And just to give you a few numbers here, NVIDIA, which is, I think, the best performing AI company, the return on investment last year was at 221%, which is a huge number. And then it's followed by a company called Symbiotics. And Symbiotics stocks yielded 53% on investment. And the third one, Upstart Holding, is just below the 50% threshold.
Yeah, so when you say return on investment, though, we need to be clear. It's if you buy the stock at the beginning of the year and then you sell it at the end of the year, you make money because people are willing to buy your shares for more, right? But it's not necessarily an intrinsic business metric that, NVIDIA is doing well, but in general, the value of a stock is a hope that you will make money in the future and be able to distribute dividends to shareholders. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any value. So there could be a little bit of a rush, and a bit of buying or selling your shares for a little too much that then, may collapse. It's happened with Peloton during COVID, the shares went up like this, and you could say return on investment for lucky people who actually bought the shares early enough and sold it to the next fool before the shares tanked by 80 or 90%. right? Where people realize that these fancy, do you know what Peloton is? I'm saying that, but I don't know if you, it's these fancy exercise bikes that became popular during COVID. And it's just like, you know, there was an episode of Sex and the City or TV show, where a guy dies after using the bike, and then it was like catastrophe and the share price went down. So, so there's a lot of craziness, I think, in the tech field, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm that will not be realized. So a lot of these share prices, a lot of these companies receiving a lot of investment, one day they will need to pay the bills, because that's how you make a business sustainable in the long term, right? Stability AI, the company, Stability AI, a few weeks ago, it came out that I don't know the numbers now to remember, but they owe millions or tens of millions to cloud computing providers, and they won't be able to pay the bills because they're not making enough money to pay the bills. So we're talking one of the trendiest AI companies out there. They can't pay the bills. Well, in the future, will they be able to sell their product for enough money in the future to cover this? And I think this is where there's a bit of exaggeration, right? We got a lot of different AI companies now. So there's OpenAI, but then you got all the other competitors, including Mistral. You got the Llama models. You got all the models. You got open source AI also. You know, there was a memo that someone from Google leaked, where someone in the company was saying, we don't have a moat. We don't have something protecting our company. People can copy our technology. So when that happens, companies end up competing on price. So they have like the lowest, you know, they may have to lower the cost of their subscriptions, right? To be subscribed to the premium version of, you know. So what's going to happen? I don't know. You know, OpenAI is trying to create a sort of marketplace to establish network effects where people use it as a platform to sell stuff to each other, to sell GPTs. So they're all trying to find a way to make this profitable. But we'll see what happens. If they can't make it at least as profitable as they want, the share price of those companies will probably go down, and the return on real return on investment will not be good. You know, if we want the return on equity, I like that quite a lot. It's called the ROE. So you see how much profit are we making yearly, divided by how much money investors put into the company, right?
It's much more realistic, isn't it?
Of a sound business, right? For most of these companies, like even companies we use every day, like Spotify, you can't even calculate that, the ROE, because there is no profit. These companies have never made a profit yet. So they're growing and growing and growing because people give them money from the outside, right? But they never generate a profit, right? So there's no ROE, it's negative, right? It's like a negative ROE. Yeah, so instead of thinking of the return of investment, if we think long term, are these companies going to generate return on equity? So is putting money into one of these companies worth it? Am I going to become a profitable business in the long term? And I think that's where people are exaggerating the capability of making solid profits from this.
So how long do you think this can go on until it bursts?
Well, I thought it would burst like a year ago. So before the ChatGPT thing happened, right? So I was already seeing it, you know, because I worked in the AI field, and I was already sensing this is going down. But then kind of the ChatGPT thing happened and it went up again. I don't know. I think it may take a year or two, I think, for a lot of companies to see that they're not generating the profits they thought they would generate. Yeah, so I think that will happen within like a year or two. This doesn't mean that AI will not get better, or, you know, but in terms of building solid businesses, you know, and I've met a lot of startups that are building a business around a ChatGPT wrapper. So the company doesn't do anything. It just converts what you want to do into a prompt and sends it to ChatGPT. You're not adding any value as a business when you do that, right? So anybody can copy that. So if that's your business, it's not a solid business. But you can't imagine how many of these companies there are out there. Yeah. And some of them are getting external funding from investors, you know. I don't think that's going to end well.
Well, we're going to have you back in 2 years and have this discussion again.
Okay.
Until then, if there are any questions from the public, please go ahead. We're going to have a microphone going around.
Yeah, hi. Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Chinese room experiment with the AIs? And the question is, do you think AI in the future will be capable of escaping the Chinese room to be conscious? In the sense of this. Well, what's your take on this?
I wish I had a copy of my book here to give to you, because I wrote a whole chapter on this. So I don't know if people are familiar with the Chinese room experiment, which is you have a person in a room, right? And they take questions from a slot, like you can't see them. They take questions in a paper, right? And let's say you answer the question, right? And if it's kind of indistinguishable, right, from the outside world, you're having this conversation with an entity that is just following, let's say it's a computer program, just following an algorithm and answering the questions in the right way, is there consciousness that emerges in that room? Is that, you know, is there a conscious entity? And if there's an operator of this, you know, doing the calculations, maybe following instructions in a book of how to answer the questions, that person wouldn't be conscious. They would just be following instructions, right? So like that person's just, you know. So this argument kind of goes, you know, the idea is to say that following the algorithm to answer the questions doesn't make you conscious. So it's not the same to say I answer your question versus I follow the algorithm to answer the question. Because when I follow the algorithm, I'm not conscious, right? So I think there are many takes on this. There's a good book by David Chalmers that I recommend to you, because if you do some of the thinking, there are logical ways where, you know, you can get to this point where there could be a conscious entity in the room, but it's not the person doing the maths. The algorithm itself gains consciousness. This is actually a very interesting point, so let me see how I can get there, you know, without getting too confused by my own thoughts. But when you let's say you take a conscious person's brain, right, who is actually answering the questions honestly in this room, right? They're having a conversation. They're conscious. They understand the language, right? They understand the language. And you replace their neurons one by one, you know, this person with a digital computer, right? Then you have a computer algorithm kind of running the program and answering the questions. So does the consciousness of this person disappear when you replace it by microchips? Because that sounds a bit crazy, right? Why would replacing a neuron by something that does the same job would make it disappear, the consciousness, right? So a lot of people say, actually, you know, consciousness, they use this as an argument to say that consciousness is just computation. So I can say a few things about that. Let's say two things about that. So I don't get too lost in my own thoughts. But so one of them is the people who are, let's say, the least spiritual, the ones that say, you know, we're machines, there's nothing out there, you know, consciousness is just like, you know, but when they assume those things, they do these thoughts experiments to prove that we're computers, something very, very funny happens, right? Which is that now they're saying that the execution of an algorithm brings consciousness, right? Brings it about, right? And that's completely detached from any physical being. So consciousness is basically running a computer program to these people. You could run it on microchips. You could take signals from my brain, send it to a group of people that in a room follow a list of rules saying what they should do, and they just send the signal back, and then there's a conscious being that kind of emerges inside that room, right? So in reality, the more materialistic you are, the more you think that, you know, neurons are computers, the more you say that actually our consciousness is an algorithm, which is the least physical thing. It's an algorithm, is a list of steps, it's a computer program. So, and this is Roger Penrose who said that. He says, I find it kind of ironic that, you know, the more like, you know, I'm a materialist, I don't believe there's anything else other than physical stuff, but then our consciousness is a computer program. So that's the first point I want to make. The other point is that when you think about this experiment, and there's a lot of thinking around it, a lot of people do this thing. They say, let's replace one neuron with a digital equivalent, you know, and they think about that. But that always assumes that our neurons are computational, that we can actually build a neuron with another type of device, like electronic digital device. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if there's a non-computational thing? Then the argument doesn't hold up, or you get lost because you're like, okay, but maybe, you know, we can't actually do that because there's something special about a neuron, something non-computational. There's people speaking about quantum mechanics here, you know, because we haven't really completely solved quantum mechanics, if you want. So many questions there. And I think it's a wonderful thought experiment. And my answer after this very long speech is that I don't think we know. And I think it's just fascinating that people go from being super physical, materialist to kind of the algorithm is what matters, that's what makes you conscious. And some people say consciousness doesn't exist, it's not a thing, there's a lot of, I would have to say that if you go to David Chalmers' book, which I totally recommend, I think it's called The Conscious Mind, I think the thought process around the Chinese experiment is really good. So I buy it, I buy the thought process. But again, I don't know if the assumptions are correct, I don't know if we can replace neurons with microchips, but it's fascinating, and I refer you to philosophers on that. I wrote a whole chapter in my book summarizing this in a much more organized way than what I've just done. So just reach out to me and I'll send you a copy. So maybe you can start there and just see the references, and maybe it'll.
Yeah, so we've touched on the subject of the Industrial Revolution, and it is true that lots of people lost their jobs, but it's also true that a lot of other opportunities were created during this period. And my question to you is, which specific jobs do you think it will replace the AI, and with what kind of other opportunities will be created during the?
So I think the jobs that may be replaced are, again, those jobs that are very good enough kind of job, generating content that doesn't have to be very good. Any generation of content that you can do kind of mechanically, even translation of stuff that isn't too important. Or I think a lot of these jobs may see changes. I don't think that many things will be replaced, though. I think a lot of jobs, they take more than we think, right? So, but if I were to choose a career path now, and it was, for instance, a creative thing, I would be more worried than ever to be able to bridge that gap, to be, super special in what I do, right? So that people really want to pay for what I do, right? Because there may be a lot of, so I think those jobs, creation of content, I can think about that. I can tell you another thing, if it helps, that I think will change in the near future, which is that I think a lot of people are getting very tired of how they find things online, or how it doesn't really work well anymore. So, and this is the opposite, so I'm trying to tell you that there's an opportunity there. I don't know if you guys, when you search for something online, you type the word Reddit after it because you want to see what people are saying about it on Reddit. Everybody does that, basically. So I've been doing that for years, okay? I'm also a skier, so whenever I want to find anything about a ski resort, I type in, after my search, I type in Snowheads, which is this website, this forum in the UK where everybody speaks about ski resorts. So when I'm not on Reddit, I'm on that website. But the reason for that, why people are doing that, is because Google search results, they're all those SEO articles that just try to sell you something. So you don't get any honest opinions about anything. And that's why you go to Reddit, because you want to see real humans tell you what they actually think, right? So you want to know if a place is worth visiting in a city. I know that's subjective, right? Is this worth visiting? Is Cluj worth visiting if I'm in Romania, right? If you type that into, is it? Yeah. So if you type that into Google, all the blog results, they will all be people trying to sell you a trip, and they're never honest about anything. But on Reddit, there will be a person that will tell you, I hated Cluj. And then another person that will say, I love Cluj. And they will tell you why, and you will get actual human opinions. And that's why we all go to Reddit, because we want to, and I find this quite funny, because everyone's saying, AI will replace content and stuff, but we all actually are trying to avoid that kind of content without a human touch in it. And that's why we go to Reddit. So we consume things that are, and I think that will be potentially a gap that will open in the market, to be, how can we better classify content? Google will have to do this at some point, because people are only using Google to go to Reddit, so I think there will be a lot of that. How can we tell good content that people click with from the content, generated from AI that people do not enjoy? So that might be That's like a bit of a digression from your question, but yeah. So, yeah, if you find yourself at a job where you think, I could just make a list of steps and it will do the job, right? Just a list of very, very easy algorithm to do my job. That's the job that risks of being replaced by AI or by technology in general. I can tell you that what I'm currently doing for work, I'm writing code, and most of my work, it's not steps. So I'm most of the time trying to figure out with the client, what do we do? What do we do to please our users? What's the easiest thing we could do? What's the lowest hanging fruit? Something we can build quickly. We're all the time asking these questions. So I would say 90% of the time, that's my job. So I can't even write down a list of steps to tell someone how to do that for me, right? But then obviously writing some simple code, if you want to create a very simple visual interface that doesn't have anything special, maybe that you can write it down, and that's the kind of job that may get replaced. So if your job can be done as a list of steps, then that's where, in that case, I would be worried. Yeah. What do you do for work?
We're also software engineers.
Okay. Do you think your work can you just write down a list of steps? Absolutely not. Okay. So then you're safe. Does anybody here, journalists, do you think you can write down no, absolutely not. Do you think you could write down the instructions to do your job as a list of steps?
I mean, some of them, yes, but there's a human touch to it that is irreplaceable, I think.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we're not computers, after all.
No, we're not.
Anybody in the room who thinks their job is just list of steps? No? No. People are quite convinced, yeah. But I think there's, look, this, it was Facebook Meta that was trying to publicize this augmented reality goggles that they created, and it was the goggles, it was the metaverse, like how would you go to this virtual reality world, and I remember they struggled a lot, like nobody really cared about the metaverse and just augmented reality in general. It's as if people don't want to walk around life wearing these goggles, but I remember in London, they were kind of to push the idea, they were trying to push the idea that it was a good idea, like to convince people that. And they were putting these ads on the back of newspapers, the ones they give you for free on the underground, that said, firefighters are going to benefit from the metaverse. And they had this picture of firefighters wearing some sort of goggle, and the fire that was kind of added on Photoshop. And I heard, for someone who was a firefighter, so like, it seems like they never met a firefighter, because this is not what we do. I think there's a lot of that. Like, when you ask people in the room again, everybody seems to think here that their job cannot be summarized as a list of steps, right? There's something, this human touch, this thing that makes us special. But then there's a lot of people saying all jobs will be replaced by AI, but not their jobs, right? So my job now is like everybody else's.
Well, unless you want to go for dinner after this with an AI, with a ChatGPT. I willingly give it over to ChatGPT if you want to.
No, I still prefer humans. Yeah. I do use ChatGPT sometimes, but.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Oh, we have two. We can do two.
Yeah, we can do two.
So going back to the Monty's question here. So if you can't replace experts with AI, but let's say AI gets good enough to replace the beginners, how is this progression going to take place from, let's say, a newbie to an expert? Because if you can't go as a human through to the steps, like you've got to start at the expert level, and that can't really happen because, right, you're born as a baby and then you die as an old man. So,
yeah.
Also, how is this going to change education, in your opinion?
Oh, that's it. That's actually many questions. No, but I've heard this before. So, yes, AI can replace expert, but what about beginners, right? And I think that's a very good question. And I don't have the answer for that. But even beginners, even a junior software developer, you're usually not just moving a button and changing the color of a button. Even as a junior developer, you tend to kind of do more. But it's a very good question. So who's gonna? Maybe AI will train them. Maybe we'll get to use AI to train people. That would be a legitimate use of AI to kind of train people. I don't know. I also think that there's a lot of confusion about why people work, right? Because it seems like a lot of people speak as if humans worked only because there's no robot to do the job for you. That's not why we people work in reality. So the reason we work is because we kind of use our resources, including our time, to kind of exchange our efforts against each other, right? Most of the things we do nowadays are not necessary for survival, right? Which is, we watch Netflix, right? And people work on producing a show. So people always find a way to do things, right, with their time to exchange efforts with one another, right? That's what the GDP of a country measures. It's like how much stuff have we produced and bought, right? There's always two sides. Someone's producing something, the other person's buying that thing, right? The easier we find producing basic stuff for survival, like food, the more we end up producing other things. You know, actually, when economies grow, it's because they learn how to do things efficiently, you know, to produce basic stuff like food. You know? And then everybody's busy doing, you know, other wonderful stuff like they're, you know, traveling. They're, you know, so I think there's. We'll probably always find work to do. There's a controversial book, but it's very interesting, called Economics in One Lesson, that was written in like the 1940s. Do you guys know the book? You know the book. It's a very famous book. And there's a chapter on automation. Will automation take our jobs? And I recommend you read just that chapter. It's a very short chapter. Because one point the guy makes is, they've been saying, and this was written like, I think in the 40s, so, you know, but he says, if automation replaced or technology replaced jobs, we wouldn't have anything to do, because they've been saying this for hundreds of years now. So he said, nowadays, if that was a thing, and we, back in the day, we decided not to use trains to transport goods and have people transport that on their backs because we wanted to protect jobs, you know, we will still be transporting stuff on our backs and like carrying. Now we have trains, which replaced all that, but we still have work to do. You know, and that's because, you know, every time an opportunity closes, a new one opens, and there's friction in between, and that's the sad part, right? Which is about the people who need to kind of learn a new skill. But there will always be something else that people will want to buy with all the free time that we will have, thanks to technology, probably. So hopefully this answers the question somehow, or gives you some food for thought. What do you think?
My personal opinion?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
No? Yeah.
Okay, my question would be that a lot of students are now using ChatGPT, and what do you think, how should we integrate the usage of AI into the education system?
Yeah, that's a very
problematic.
I'm not an educator much. I am though, because I write books. Yeah, I'm writing another book now, and I've taught courses and stuff. But look, I interviewed someone for a job like a few weeks ago, and it was a software development job, and I didn't care if the guy would use ChatGPT in the interview, which could happen. I was like, you know, I'm gonna try to be modern, because now youngsters do that. You know, sometimes they use ChatGPT. But I was like, if he wants to do that, I'll be okay with it. But I want him to explain to me why that solution is the right one, right? Because AI hallucinates, so we always need to validate what it does, right? So that was my approach to that. It was, you know, that's what I wanted. What we wanted in the person we hired in the company. It was, we want someone who knows how things work. You know, who. That was the kind of profile we were waiting for. And I think there could be some of that in education, right? Can people understand how things work? They can use ChatGPT to do any research they want. But I don't know, if you're teaching physics, do you understand what inertia is? Or, you know, and I've seen this a lot. Like, my education was terrible in many ways. When I went to school, high school was awful. When I went to uni, some things were good, some weren't so good. But I did take a course on statistics, for example, and I got a good grade. But there were so many things I didn't actually understand. So I could do the maths. I could do like standard deviation here. And I learned these things on the job later when working as a data scientist. I got them, right? And I wish I'd been taught how to think about those things, right? Instead of just parroting or repeating stuff. And I think kind of ChatGPT is independent of that, right? Because you can use ChatGPT or a book to copy information. You can also use it to learn. But I don't know. I think the education system may benefit from, you know, focusing on teaching how things work, or making sure people get it. so many things that I didn't get, and I remember when I studied chemistry, memorizing all these chemical compounds and the position of all the carbon atoms and stuff by heart, of all the super long organic, I forgot about them in 2 days, It was useless to learn that. I didn't actually learn anything, I just studied stuff, right? So I don't know, and there's also obviously the question in the classroom of what if people use ChatGPT to produce an essay, for example, to write something, I think it will be hard for teachers to prevent that. So they may need to wonder, can I give a task to students that they will actually be happy to learn instead of copy it from ChatGPT? Or can I assess if students understand something? Like I did with this guy the other day in the interview. Even though he didn't use ChatGPT, I kind of wanted to know, did he understand how this is done, right? It was a bit of a, what do you do for work? Are you like a software developer? Or?
Yes, I'm also a developer.
Okay, so this guy, he had studied statistics, and in the interview, I asked him a question that I've asked before. It was, so it was like, do you know what an unbiased estimator is? So the guy, yes, and he gave me the definition, right? And I'm okay with that, but did the guy understand what an unbiased estimator was? Because when I learned that, I didn't understand it. I knew how to do the maths, but then I got to learn it later on, and it's very important in machine learning. So I asked him, if I want to know the average age of people in a building or a room, and I go and ask one person, what's your age? Would that question be an unbiased estimator of the age in the room? And this guy was like, well, yeah. He answered, he got it. He said, yeah, it's an unbiased estimator. He very quickly answered that question because he knew what an unbiased estimator was, right? And if I had been asked that question back in the day when I studied what it was without knowing what it was, I would have been like, okay, hold on, the summation of because I didn't get it. So this is to give you an example of, I think true understanding is very important, and I don't see how ChatGPT changes that much. Does this answer some of your questions at least, or do you have any thoughts, anything you want to share about this?
Well, I was mostly thinking about the same because I was using ChatGPT mostly for research and to connect the dots.
Yeah.
I can see that. But I was also thinking that it's not good that many students are thinking that you can generate and you can live an easy life, and then at one moment you will see that you don't know nothing. So I think the best way to use ChatGPT, for instance, when you're coding and stuff, is if you can formulate the question easily, maybe go and use Chat, because sometimes a task is so complicated that it's easier to actually go and write the code and try to describe to ChatGPT what it is. Mm-hmm. But if you can explain it easily, but also validate it easily, that's good. When you can tell very quickly if it's right or wrong. It happens sometimes with snippets of code. A few days ago, I had to download this file from S3. I don't know if you guys have done this, from this AWS. It was a line of code that I always forget. I had this Boto library that I always forget how to do it. But I've done it in the past, so the moment ChatGPT kind of gave me that line of code, I knew that it was right because I've done it before, but I can also test it really quickly, right? So it kind of replaced the Google search, but I knew how to verify, and I could do it easily, to verify that the result was correct. So I think those are the best uses you can make of ChatGPT. Like you said, you're doing research, it's fine if you know that it could hallucinate, so you need to make sure that, so don't take its word for, whatever it says, you need to go validate it. Thank you for the answer.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Thank you everyone for coming, and if you haven't purchased his book, it's really, really good, Smart Until It's Dumb, so it's, I'm definitely recommending it. Thank you, Emmanuel, for being with us today, and maybe in 2 years from now, we'll have you back and talk about those predictions that you
and we'll be
made.
jobless, maybe.
Yeah, who knows? Thank you so much.
What do you think you'll be jobless?
No, I hope not.
You hope not?
No.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.